It's getting better all the time, mental health outreach. I wanted to take a few minutes. Earlier we were talking about 2020, but I wanted to talk about some of the things that we've encountered, what's been going on as far as from a mental health only kind of category. I was reading an article that came out of, and I'm sorry, I want to say Washington Post, but maybe not. And it said, how did former NBA player, I'll fill in the blank, end up struggling and whatever with his challenges? How did he end up struggling? That was the title. Again, how did former NBA player, I'll fill in the blanks, I'm not going to call his name, ended up struggling? So when you look at the article, the writer, that was the caption that he or she chose, and I'm saying to myself, it's the same reason that everybody else ends up struggling. Okay, unfortunately, within the United States, the mental health, the treatment for mental health, the treatment for severe and persistent mental illnesses, and those of you who listen to the broadcast or go to our website, igbatt.com, you know the differences, because I kind of talk about it often. But for the treatment for severe and persistent mental illnesses, unfortunately, it's more of a reactory. We react instead of being proactive. And there are a lot of reasons kind of for that. But again, the title was, how did former NBA player, fill in the blank, because I'm not calling his name, end up struggling? Okay, I can ask that using reason. When I looked at this particular article, it highlighted some of his challenges in the article. You know, they talked about how now he's homeless. But here's the thing. He also said he was struggling since the 8th grade. So since the 8th grade, this young man was struggling. He was diagnosed with bipolar, had a history of suicidal ideations, recent job loss, frequent job losses, etc., etc. And there are people who are saying, well, the NBA should do something. And I'm glad, I hope that they do. But the question is, we always want to talk about people should do something after the person hits rock bottom. Okay? And unfortunately, that's really, we have to kind of do better with that. There was another case in the D.C. area where this gentleman stabbed, let me get it right, he stabbed, the young lady was out jogging, if I'm correct. No, I think she's out walking her dog. She was out, anyway, and she was walking her dog, walking dogs, and he stabbed her. And, people were saying, oh my God, what happened, and same thing. A long history of mental illness, long history, he was homeless, same guy, his family had tried to get him help, but he was going up against a system, okay? We have a system that fails people with severe and persistent mental illness. So even if let's just say, there are a lot of reasons, as I said before, but even if you get the person to the hospital, depending on where you are within the United States, depending on where you live, there may or may not be enough beds, or they may not have the right insurance, or the doctor of the hospital, for whatever reason, may choose not to admit this person, or if they admit them and don't keep them for a long period of time. Let me say this, for those of you who are watching me, there is a difference between the type of treatment you get when you're poor and the type of treatment you get when you're rich. There is a difference. There's a type of treatment that you get when you are a certain color, depending on where you are, versus if you're another color. Okay, I can tell you, unfortunately, many times black men in general actually present with depression, for example, a little differently. When you're looking at a black man, for example, a black boy, for example, a lot of times what people only see the first thing they see is the aggression, right? Oh, he's just so aggressive. He's just so aggressive. Not really understanding that there's something else behind that aggression, or something that's fueling that aggression. So when you look at a child, a black boy is what I'm talking about now, that's in the public school or whatever, and he's going through a lot of different stuff, people don't think that this child maybe could be dealing with a mental illness, or this child could be have some other kind of issues going on with them. Yes, we want to blame it on poor home, and sometimes that's the case, because in some homes, the homes are very chaotic. If you have a child where parents are going in and out, they're fighting, they're on drugs, the neighborhood is chaotic, the child can't sleep, the child can't rest, the child doesn't get a chance to eat, of course that will impact. We're talking about trauma. But what I'm trying to say here is that many times when you have a black boy, like say in school, they impact all aspects of an individual's life, and they tend to start earlier. Okay, so early we can notice things about a child. But what happens is when a child is in the school, let's just say, for me, for an example, let's just say I'm a child and I'm dealing with some things. I don't know necessarily how to say what I'm dealing with. I don't necessarily know. The 8th grade, I start self-medicating. I don't know why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, but I just know that these drugs, these things help me. They help regulate my mood. I may not say it like that at being in the 8th grade, but that's what's happening. So I go through life now. I have the 8th grade, the 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th, just going through life wanting to use these drugs. So I start using drugs, I get in trouble. And then I get in trouble, and then now I'm confronted with a system that's not always, doesn't always look favorably on me. So now you see all that aggression. A lot of times what we see, the first time, especially with men, we see the aggression. We see their irritability. And when someone naturally we all like this. If someone comes up to me or to you and you don't know any better, they're aggressive, you're going to respond in kind. Right? So a lot of times, my point is that a lot of these kids, a lot of these boys don't get the help that they should be getting early enough because of their behavior. We see the behavior problem, right? We see the behavior problem. We see the impact that it's causing on the schools, and we just want them out. And sometimes that is appropriate. I'm not saying that it's not, but we have to have other kind of interventions for those kids who are difficult, who are, if I can use that term, difficult to reach, difficult to engage, who are very quote-unquote combative, aggressive, because those kids are going to grow up, and many of them are going to grow up to be adults, right? So we want to do something. So when we look at both of these stories, the NBA player and the gentleman who I'll call Mr. A, who, like I said, who stabbed the Walker, both had mental illnesses. They've had them for years. They've had them as children, as young adults, and they engaged systems that failed them, systems that were fragmented, systems that could have done a better job, because we wait until things get worse before we do anything about it. And let me see if I can read something here. And we have to not do that. We have to kind of begin to if I can bring it up. Well, we're looking at seriously mentally ill or in jail. We have a whole lot of people with severe and persistent mental illnesses who are in jail, okay? Because there's no other place to put them. There's no other place. I wanted to share something. Okay. I can't find that out, what I'm looking for. But when we're looking at people with serious mental illnesses account for a large portion of suicide, homelessness, violence, and incarceration. Okay? We have the jails, like I said, are the new mental health providers, which is sad. It's sad because we have to do a better job. I think it's great when we advocate for all the things that we advocate for. Clean water, which is important. Impeachment, if that's your thing. Advocating for, the whales, the polar bears, all that type of stuff. That's great. But we need more people to really advocate for people with serious mental illness. Because people people with serious mental illness don't necessarily are not able to advocate for themselves. I'm going to recommend a website which I think is really great. It's the mentalillnesspolicy.org. mentalillnesspolicy.org, and there you can see how your states match up. Whether some states are better than others, and some states are just terrible when it comes to this. Many times people can't get help until they reach rock bottom. You have to go into the hospital or see a doctor, say you're suicidal sometimes, in order to get help. And that shouldn't be the case. We should not be in a position where family members, friends, they have to wait until their loved one is on the streets before they try to get them help. Because mental illnesses are treatable. There are medications out there that can help. So when we look at how did this gentleman get here, we can... First, he was diagnosed as a young boy. What is it, 8th grade. The other gentleman, who I call Mr. A, he was diagnosed as a young man as well. I can tell you that the parents did try, in the case of the Mr. A, the parents did try to get him help. He went. Parents said, hey, can we get help? Can we do something from the system? The system said, well, he's not a danger to himself. Well, at that time, he wasn't, okay? Well, he's not a danger to himself. And let me stop here. If you are a loved one and you're trying to get help for your loved one, and they say to you, ask you, well, is he a danger to himself? And is he thinking about killing himself? That you know of, no. Or he or she may say no. They say, is he a danger to himself? You want to say yes, because you got to kind of increase that definition or expand that what people think of. If you have a loved one who is walking the street and making a whole bunch of noise and knocking on people's doors, he can be a danger to himself, because somebody can get angry and pull out a baseball bat or something and start to harm him or her. So yes, he's a danger to himself. If he's not taking medications, I'm talking about the not necessarily psychotropic, but let's just say he has a chronic illness. Maybe he's diabetic, he or she, and they're not taking their diabetes medication because of the voices in their head, then he or she is a danger to him or herself. If your loved one is losing weight, right, he or she is a danger to himself. So you have to kind of unfortunately, you have to be able to present your case. And we talk about this. If you go onto my website, igbatt.com, there's a booklet you can download that gives you some of the questions that you should, think about asking. Unfortunately, we live in a society where this stuff happens. It's all too common. When we talk about severe and persistent mental illnesses, we're talking about schizophrenia, we're talking about bipolar, we're talking about severe depression sometimes. So we're talking about illnesses when a person is psychotic. And what are we talking about psychotic? What does that mean? Psychosis means being out of touch with reality. And there are several diseases or illnesses and where psychosis manifests. Schizophrenia is one of them. Bipolar is one of them. Major depression, severe, is one of them. And of course, psychotic disorder. But when a person is out of touch with reality, they don't know. They don't understand. I always say to people, if you were walking down the street and you saw somebody that was bleeding, hopefully I would think you would at least call 911. Well, why don't we do that with people who have a mental illness? Why don't we do that? Why don't we take the same care, the same approach? We'd rather wait until something happens where they are so out of their medications, where they either hurt someone or somebody hurts them. People with a mental illness are no more violent than other people. But here's the thing you have to remember. As long as they're taking their medications. If they're not taking their medications, or if they are alcohol and drugs involved, then they are. And that's the stats that we have to take a look at. But we have to really do something. We can't wait until this basketball player, the only reason why people are talking about him now is because somebody took a picture of him and uploaded it to the YouTube. But he's not the only homeless person that's been uploaded to YouTube. He's not the only person with a severe and persistent mental illness that's been on Facebook or Twitter that people have YouTube. You see them all on the news. We've gotten so used to it now. We've gotten, I think some of us, just really immune to it. We step over people there on grates, they're sleeping out on the street. We just step over them. We get used to people. We see people talking to themselves and digging in trash. We cross the street, right? We have to do something. We, here in the United States, we have to do more than what we are doing, right? And that begins by really approaching our legislators. It begins by saying, hey, we need to get some mental health reform on the books. When you talk about the 2020 candidates, and as we coming up in the United States for that election, we need to ask our candidates, okay, what are you going to do about the problem? What are you going to do about people with? We got a lot of homeless on the street. Many of the people who are homeless on the street also have severe and persistent mental illnesses. So what are you going to do, Mr. or Mrs. Candidate? Okay, what's the plan? We have to have a plan. There are things that can be done. I talked before about assisted outpatient treatment. If you have a loved one that goes in and out of the hospital, be involved. And when you're involved, ask for that. That's where it's kind of mandatory court-ordered outpatient treatment, where they have to see a doctor or they go back to jail or go to jail. But you have to kind of, we got to advocate. We can't just say it's everybody else's fault. Now, because of this NBA player, everybody's, well, what is the NBA going to do? What is the NBA going to do? We always want somebody else to do something. The question is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Okay, the guy's homeless on the street. Why don't you go find him and do something? And I'm talking to people who are saying this. Why don't you go do something? You see people out on the street. You can't find him, but there are people out on the street who are just like him. So why don't you go maybe take some sandwiches, take some warm food? Why don't you go do that? Why don't you go and try to encourage them to get help? Well, that's not my job. I shouldn't do that. Well, okay, here we are. We'd rather wait until something happens before we start talking. So we have to kind of get out there. So the question is, how did he get like that? How did people with severe and persistent mental illnesses go to the point where they're living on the street? Well, because a lot of signs were missed. We didn't appropriately respond when people were younger. We didn't appropriately respond the first time. We just ignored them. In cases where there's a person with a lot of aggression, a lot of attitude, quote unquote, that's just attitude. That's just them. He's just a narcissist. He's just that. So we rather focus on those things, not really understand that this person indeed does have a mental health issue. Okay? So again, what can we do? Log on to our website at ingbatt.com. Also, I think I'll put this on my website. It's there, but just so you can see it. mentalillnesspolicy.org has a lot of good stuff. I really encourage you to go to that website. They just have a lot of good stuff to get you start thinking. But we have to do something before you see the YouTube video of the person out on the street. Before the person goes and kills someone. We got to do something before. We have to do better. We can do better. We just have to focus, right? When we talk about severe and persistent mental illnesses, we're not talking about just regular mental illnesses. We're talking about just that, severe and persistent mental illnesses, a certain class of illnesses. So again, this is igbatt.com. It's getting better all the time, mental health outreach. You can log on to our website, igbattmho.org. Give us a call at 240-432-6763. And thank you for joining me. God bless. Have a great day.